Welcome to Creept It Real Nostalgic. Thank you so much for being here. We're all here to witness Were You Afraid of the Dark, that 90s staple. We're very excited to bring out some folks that you will really appreciate. I'm going to have our moderator and friend and host, Jeff Depaoli of That Halloween Podcast, get us kicked off. Jeff Depaoli.
Hi everybody, thanks for being here today. I'm a super Are You Afraid of the Dark fan, so I'm excited to bring my guests up. First up, let's bring up DJ MacHale, the co-creator and a director and writer of Are You Afraid of the Dark. And Jason Alisharan, any seat you want. Jason Alisharan, who played Midnight Society member Frank. And Eddie Robinson is joining us, who was in a very famous episode of The Tale of the Midnight Madness. Well, welcome. I'm so glad you guys could be here. Who is like a die-hard fan of the show? Like, you don't have to lie. Like, I am obsessed with the show. Excellent. I love to see some die-hards here. Let's just start at the beginning, because DJ, let's talk a little bit about the origins of Are You Afraid of the Dark? How did this concept come about? Was Nickelodeon looking for a scary show?
No. In fact, they didn't want to do it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it was a tough sell. The origin of the show was partner Ned Candle and we had made a show called Encyclopedia Brown.
Love that show.
On
HBO. Yes.
And we decided we want to do something ourselves. So we came up with this idea, which essentially was bedtime stories for lazy parents. And the idea was we would get some old guy, some old actor who's out of work, and he'd sit in some big old cushy chair in front of a fireplace with a big book that said fairy tales. And he'd read the fairy tales, and then we'd record them and package it together. And this was intended to be direct to video. Remember those days? Direct to video. So it's a good idea. So the idea is that a parent who didn't feel like reading to their kid that night would say, okay, pop the tape in, here you go, listen to this old guy tell you the fairy tales. Where we hit the brick wall was we didn't know what fairy tales to do, because they all seemed so kind of dull. And it's like, we're not going to do Little Red Riding Hood, you know. So Ned asked me the infamous question. He said, what kind of stories did you like when you were a kid? I said, I like scary stories. He said, oh. So fairy tales became scary tales. Then we thought it was a little weird to have some old guy telling scary stories to little kids. Hey, come here, little kid, I'll tell you the story about this thing. So we're like, well, we don't want the storyteller to be scary. Let's have kids tell the stories to the kids. Like, where would they do that? Oh, around a campfire. So there's kids sitting around a campfire. And then it's like, well, why are we stopping there? Why are we going to have them tell the story? Why don't we see the story? That's when the budget went whoop, and it became a TV series. And we took it to Nickelodeon, and we explained it. It's going to be kids sitting around a campfire, and they're going to be telling scary stories, and they're going to be really scary. It's not going to be like Scooby-Doo scary, you know. It's going to be like really scary. And they said no. They said no, you can't scare little kids. And I was like, well, yes, I can.
All of a sudden, he's the creepy old guy.
Yeah, suddenly I'm the creepy old guy. So we went away, and after we were gone for like a year, in the interim, some development executive, Nickelodeon, had gone through the dead show files, and he picked out the little 3-page thing that I wrote for Scary Tales. And he went to his bosses and said, how come we're not doing this show? And they called us back in to say, so, is anyone doing that Scary Tales show? And we're like, oh yeah, a lot of offers on that, yeah. Nobody cared. But that's how it started. And then we found a Canadian partner to pay for half of it, and now we're sitting here today 40 years later, 30 years later.
Awesome. Very cool. And the Midnight Society was born. And I'm curious, was there any like strategy as far as the number of kids, or was there conversation about the number of kids that would be perfect? Or was it just like, we'll have this many kids, 2 stories in a season, or?
It was, like with any kind of ensemble that you're writing about, you try to get a variety of types of characters. And so I wanted to have a guy who was kind of a tough guy. And then there was the boss who was always in charge, and then there was the girl who, so I had a whole bunch, and I came up with 7 characters. And 7 was one too many. because when you do a season of 13 episodes, that means not everyone's going to get 2 stories to tell. So after our first season, one of the Midnight Society went away. We don't know whatever happened to him, and I wish I had addressed it, but I didn't, because here we are decades later. People say, whatever happened to Eric? I'm like, I don't know, he was hit by a bus, I don't know. So it was more trying to come up with 7 types of characters, but that was too many. So it came down to 6.
All right, so if there were 6 and there were 13 episodes a season, right? Was there like, everybody's getting 2, somebody's getting 3. Jason, was there ever any conversation amongst the Midnight Society members who were like, all right, like, who's gonna win it this season?
Jeff, you're assuming there was that much feedback between like us, the cast, and DJ. There was no feedback loop there. I mean, I think if I remember it, Rain, I think would end up getting the third or other ones or whatever. I mean, for me, it's like I didn't really tell that many stories. I was always kind of mucking around the campfire doing something weird, so it didn't really, faze me. I never got the seasons stuff and said, well, what am I telling? There was nothing like that. There was no divas on that. We've been sitting back there reminiscing, and there was no divas. There was no tantrums or anything like that.
I mean, one of the things I tried to do is we create these scripts, these stories, and we all had characters that these guys played. And so I tried to match the story with the storyteller. And for example, Frank, Jason, he told the first, because he was inducted into the Midnight Society in his very first episode, which is the first series episode. It was called The Tale of the Phantom Cab. And that was with a character named Dr. Vink.
With the Come on, you cannot just say it without doing with the
Actually, I've got a funny story about that. So from then on, it's like, ooh, I didn't think he was going to be a recurring character, but it's like, ooh, we have to do more episodes? I'm going to write another Dr. Vink story. So it made sense that Frank would always tell the Dr. Vink stories. And Gary always told the Sardo stories. So I try to match the things. And I think maybe one of the reasons that Rain, Betty Ann, told more, if she did, I don't know if she told more stories. But if you know the character of Betty Ann, she's like the sweetest, most demure, as is Rain, the girl.
And her stories were twisted too.
She's the most twisted stories there.
That was what was so much fun about it. Yeah.
So everyone's favorite storyteller, sorry.
No,
Everyone say, who's your favorite storyteller? Betty Ann. She tells the weird stories.
So, one of the things that's so interesting about the Midnight Society is it's such a diverse group. Back before it was like fashionable to be a diverse group, was that in order from Nickelodeon? Was that your choice, or how did that all come about?
I don't want to give full credit to Nickelodeon, but I give them a lot of credit. They were Nickelodeon. How many are 90s Nickelodeon? Okay, so you'll know what I'm saying now. That Nickelodeon was almost like the anti-Disney. Especially if there was anything that Nickelodeon had a lot of say in and gave me notes on nothing except casting. Because they wanted real kids. They wanted authentic kids. They didn't want these perfect kids. And there are a lot of times, we had a lot of actors in the show. We had to cast a lot of kids. And sometimes they would nix a kid because they'd say, he's too Disney. He's too freckle face, overacting. I mean, bigger than life. They wanted real kids. And they wanted diversity. So that was a very big part of it. And I give them big credit. And I am very proud to say because of that, we were nominated for an NAACP award because of our in the very first season, we did a show called The Super Specs. And we cast, there was a couple, and we had these 2 actors, Eugene Bird, and I forgot the girl's name. Eugene is black, the girl is white, and Ned and I was like, are we going to get flack for this? And we're like, who cares? Let's just do it. So we had an interracial couple in 1992, when it really wasn't expected. And Eddie's episode, same thing. It was an interracial couple.
Also, never addressed either. In either episode, it's not like you guys were like, I know we're from different places. Like you just did it like it was normal. Like, and Are You Afraid in general? I mean, there were a lot of mixed race couples, mixed race parents. You
the best actor for the job, you're going to get it. And I'm very proud of that. But
unless you look too Disney, then you're not going to get it.
No.
But that's awesome. That's great. Now, the Midnight Society, obviously, you had a few minutes at the beginning, a few minutes at the end. How long were you actually shooting a season?
We shot all the campfire at once. So it was like, I think as DJ said, it was like 2 weeks a year, or 2 weeks a season. So we would just do, the first episode would be before lunch, and then we'd have lunch and change clothes, and then do the second intro and ending.
Then I gotta ask the question, Jason, where the hell was Frank for season 5? You had 1 season left before, the kind of reboots. Where was Frank?
Yes, why was that, Jason?
No, I get this question all the time. I was entering, I think I was like my junior year of high school, and it was like, going to university, it was kind of getting serious. And I'd done 4 seasons, and I really enjoyed it. And I was, DJ and I had a good relationship, and I went to him, and it was like, nothing diva here. I was like, look, I gotta kind of concentrate on school, and I know you're setting the schedule, and it's like, hey, I'm kind of available at these times, but I want to be, that guy. If you can work, I'd love to do it, but if you can't do it schedule-wise, like, I can't do it. And DJ was like, let me take a look, and then he couldn't do it, and that's all it was.
So it's DJ's fault.
It's neither. I mean, like, DJ he gave me my first shot. I'd never been on television before. He was the one who gave me that chance, and he's a terrific person to work for.
Well, I give Jason credit for this. He called me. A lot of times you get the agent call, you get the manager call, you get the casting director call. Jason called me to say, DJ, I think I got to focus on other stuff. And I was like, what? No,
Well,
no problem.
the fans were bummed, just saying. But come on, just do it as adults. That wouldn't be weird at all, right? Bring the original cast back and do like that sort of reboot. Because we all know it's been rebooted, but let's just bring back the original.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
The original Midnight Society.
Actually, I got a call. I think Paramount called me at one point, and they were like, would you go back? I think Nickelodeon called, and they were like, would you go and do, something? I was like, sure, yeah, whatever, I'm available. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, fine.
That's awesome. Now, the introductions obviously were, introduced the stories and everything. So were those the last thing to be written? The tales were written and then somebody knew, did the writers of the stories write those introductions, or was it a completely different crew, director, writer, everything?
Good question. In the beginning, because if you know the show, or if you don't know the show, it's always those kids sitting around a campfire and they introduce the tale. Then you go and you see the tale, and then it ends back at the campfire where they kind of wrap the tale up. So it was important that we had to know what the tales were that they were going to introduce, because you couldn't shoot a campfire to say, well, tonight's tale is really scary, and it's about a scary thing that happens, and I call this story The Tale of the Soldier. You're adding the sound later. You couldn't do that, so the pressure was on me to make sure I knew what all the stories were going to be. We shot the campfires maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the season, because we had to start delivering shows. So I had to know what all the stories were going to be very early on. And in the beginning, I had the writers who were writing the episode do the Midnight Society scenes. It turned out to be too hard, because no one knew the Midnight Society better than I did. So from season 2 on, I wrote all the Midnight Society scenes.
And did you have finished scripts when you were writing those, or
No, finished concepts.
Concepts? Wow, interesting. Now, the Tale of the Midnight Madness. Love that episode. One of my favorites. I think it's one of the most iconic, right? Yeah. Awesome. How did this tale come about? Because you wrote this one, right?
Yeah, I wrote and directed it. This is really fun. I told these guys this earlier, and they're like, really? I didn't know. Early on, when Nickelodeon was so afraid that parents are going to be coming to their doors with pitchforks and torches saying you're scaring our kids to death, they said, if you can, try to base stories on literary antecedents. So stories that are in the public domain or whatever, so that if we get complaints, we can say, what are you talking about? This is classic literature. And in fact, I think the reason why I wrote 3 scripts before we shot the pilot, and I didn't want to do the script we ended up doing. I wanted to make the pilot the tale of the dark music. If you know that episode, it's about the boogeyman in the basement and the kid goes down. I thought that was a quintessential Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. And they said, nope, we want the tale of the twisted claw. The reason being, the tale of the twisted claw was a takeoff on The Monkey's Paw, which is a classic short story, and that was their first shot at, if we get in trouble, we'll say, hey, you know what's it. So the tale of the Midnight Madness, it is based on an old fable, and no one would ever guess. These guys couldn't guess it when I brought it up today. If you know the story, does anyone know the episode, Tale of the Midnight Madness, about the movie theater? It's about a movie theater that's about to go out of business, and this mysterious guy, Dr. Vink, Frank's creation, comes in with this magical movie, and he says, if you show this movie, people will start to come to your theater. And he says, and in return, all I want is one night a week to show my other movies. So the theater manager's like, yeah, sure, whatever you want, fine. And so the guy leaves, and Eddie and the girl, they're like, should we show this movie? And like, no, throw it away. So they decide, something happens, and they decide to show the movie. And it's an old vampire movie, like Nosferatu. I think it's called Nosferatu. And it works. It's like suddenly the movie theater becomes popular again, and people start flooding, and suddenly they're busy, and oh my gosh, and they start getting better costumes and all that kind of stuff. They're looking all slick, and they're cool. Well, Dr. Vink comes back and says, okay, now I want my one night a week. And the theater manager's like, nah, I can't do that. I'm getting A-list movies here. I can't be showing your old movies here. So Dr. Vink, what's the line? He says, one shouldn't make a bargain if you can't honor your commitments. Essentially, the vampire movie comes to life, and the vampire comes off the screen and starts terrorizing everybody, chasing Eddie around the theater and all that kind of stuff. So that theme is an old fable that we may all know, called the Pied Piper of Hamelin. There's a story about the Pied Piper where there's this town in Germany that is overrun by rats. They can't get rid of the rats, and this Pied Piper, whatever that is, comes to town and says, I can play my pipe and I'll get rid of your rats, and in return I want 30 pieces of gold or something. So he comes in, plays his pipe, all the rats leave the town, and he comes back and says, okay, I want payment. And they're like, yeah, we don't have 30 pieces of gold, sorry. So he said, okay, I'm gonna take your children. So he plays the pipe, and the children, depending which version you see, the kids will either all die, the original Grimm version, or they go to an amusement park or something. I don't know what it is. So that's Midnight Madness. That's okay. So I used a literary antecedent and turned it into a Dr. Fink story.
And did Nickelodeon ever get complaints about the things being too scary?
As far as I know, never. That may be different today with social media, but back in those days, you would have to actually write a letter.
Yeah.
To send it to someone, or make a call.
Now, Eddie, were you familiar with the show when you went out on this audition?
Absolutely, I was familiar with the show. I grew up just like everyone here. Hopefully, probably were born in the '90s or something like that. Just watching the shows on Saturday night on Nickelodeon, and it was great to be able to step into the world that I'd grown up watching also all the time. So it was really, really fun.
And does anyone remember the show Swan's Crossing? Swan's Crossing was a kids soap opera, also created by the co-creator of Are You Afraid of the Dark, and he kind of left Are You Afraid of the Dark to make Swan's Crossing. Eddie was one of the stars of Swan's Crossing. So when we were looking for more actors, because we needed actors desperately, Ned said, I got this guy in New York who's awesome. And that's how Eddie got the part.
Oh, so you weren't even in Canada?
No.
Wow.
I was, when I was a kid, I was coming up from Washington, D.C. to New York to audition for everything, and so luckily this opportunity came about because of Ned and because of our relationship in the show. So yeah.
That's really cool. Do either of you have like really interesting audition stories, or do you remember how many times you had to go in and read?
For this one, I sent in a tape.
You self-taped
I
in the 90s?
in the 90s.
Wow.
I don't know how I did it. Like,
Back before that was a thing.
like a pterodactyl.
You were ahead of your time.
Yeah.
I actually only auditioned once. I went in Vancouver, and then I was a theater actor, and I was actually on tour. And then I got this call, and this is the early 90s, so we're in the middle of interior British Columbia, and I get this call from my agent, and they're like, oh yeah, this Are You Afraid of the Dark thing, they like you, and they want you to put yourself on tape for like a callback for this thing. I'm like, I'm nowhere. Like, I don't have a video camera, like what am I gonna do? And so I had been in this theatrical production that had been shot, like on film. It was like a cut scene. And so we said, well, what if we send them this sort of cut scene that they can see me act again? Because I couldn't really do anything else. So we sent it. I didn't really think much about it. And then I got a call, and they were like, okay, well, pack your bags. You got to go to Montreal and shoot, you're a part of the Midnight Society. And I was like, that's fantastic. And I never had a television role or a film role. So it was a huge deal. I grew up in Vancouver, to fly to Montreal and to do the show. And it's why I'm here today. It's a seminal part of my childhood. So it was very exciting.
That is very, very cool. Now, Jason, I think I know the answer to this question, but I gotta ask it anyway. Did you know this? Like, did you get the full script? Did you know the story that you were introing, or did you? You did. Okay, so you had a whole breakdown of like the story you were introing.
When the seasons would start, you get a big box, and it would be like the entire season, like every script. And so, the first season, because I'm a keener, I'd be like, I'd read every single one, right? By the time you get to the second one, you're just like flipping through it. You're like, oh, okay, there's a line, and then only the episodes you're telling, well, you're gonna read those because you got to know what's going on. But the rest of the time, you're just like, I don't know. And again, I did more things around the campfire. They had me doing things and not telling the story, so it was really more contained to whatever hijinks Frank got up to, That was it.
And we mentioned your character Frank invented the character of Dr. Vink with the v. Now, you said there's a story behind the v. What's that?
Oh,
what
yeah.
happened there?
So I created this character, Dr. Vink, and there was a joke that I threw into the first episode. It ended up becoming a recurring joke, but it wasn't meant to be a recurring joke. I didn't know we were going to make another episode.
So you didn't know Dr. Vink was going to be reoccurring?
No, I didn't know we were going to have another season. I thought that was it. So the standard joke is Dr. Vink is introduced, and he said, my name is Dr. Vink. And one of the kids would say, Dr. Fink? And Vink would reply, Vink with a v. And everyone remembers that. That wasn't what I intended. When I wrote it, how do you spell v? What I wanted him to say was Vink with a v. And how do you spell v? So I in the script v. So we're doing the table read before we shot the episode, and Aaron Tager, the late Aaron Tager, who played Dr. Vink so beautifully, we get to the point where he says, Dr. Fink, Vink with a v. And I was a hair away from going, oh no, it's v. But I stopped myself and I'm like, no, if he wants to read it that way, if that's what speaks to him, that's what it'll be. And so he coined his v, even though it wasn't what I intended. But and I love how when people like you say Dr. Vink with a v. Should have been v.
And then his other line, I am not a nut.
And I am not a nutbag.
Yeah, I love that character. Jason, did you ever get to meet Aaron, who played Dr. Vink?
I did. I met him a couple times.
Oh, that's cool. Awesome. So I think you had mentioned, actually, you two had met prior, which surprised me because I just assumed it was being shot so separately that you wouldn't have
No,
visited.
when I saw the poster, the story goes, so this was the first season, right? Is that first season?
I think it's second season.
Okay. So we're finishing the campfire, and he's going into shooting the episodes. And DJ comes up to me, and he's like, you gotta meet this guy. You gotta meet this. He was so excited. He's like, you gotta meet this guy, Eddie. Like, I was like, great. I'm like, let's meet, So I go down to their set, and this was the Nosferatu set with the blocks, right? And I met Eddie. He was a really cool guy. And DJ was also just so excited about him too. I mean, DJ was like a very positive guy, but he was particularly excited about Eddie as an actor, and so it stuck with me. And Eddie's a cool guy, so.
Okay, can I tell my funny Eddie story?
Please. Yeah, do it. Go for it. Okay.
You don't need my permission.
You know how shows have, I told him this before, so he'll know the embarrassment that's about to happen. Do you remember this at all? Vaguely? Okay. So you know how shows have blooper reels? And it's always because somebody flubs a line and they go, we never had a blooper reel in Are You Afraid of the Dark? And the reason we never had a blooper reel Real was because we're mostly working with kid actors, and kid actors have all their gray cells. They don't forget their lines. They're always spot on, so adults are a whole different ballgame. But if we ever did have a blooper reel, Eddie would have been on it. Because we did this scene where, if you've seen the episode, if not, you should go back and look at it. You can see the scene. It's a scene where it takes place in an old school movie theater, and Eddie is behind the candy counter, and Melanie is the actress, was in front of the candy counter, and they're having dialogue, and off camera is Dr. Vink. It comes to the door, and he's rattling the door. He's trying to get in, and so what Eddie has to do, he calls off camera, and he says, "We're closed. Come back in an hour. We're closed." Well, Vink doesn't go away, so Eddie leaps over the candy counter, joins Melanie, and they both run off camera to meet Dr. Vink. And if you see the episode, watch it, that's exactly what happens. And Eddie so deftly climbs over the counter and goes over. What you don't see is all the previous takes. And I blame myself. This is not Eddie's fault by any stretch of the imagination. I thought it was kind of a fun idea to see if somebody vault over the candy counter, because Eddie's obviously capable of doing it. It was a lot better than having to have to walk all the way around and come around the backside. It's like, okay, fine. So Eddie's game is like, yeah, I'll do it fine. What you didn't, so I blame myself for coming up with it. I also blame the wardrobe designer for putting Eddie in a pair of pants that were so tight. It was like a sausage. I'm surprised he didn't talk like this while he's doing the whole episode. So all the outtakes are Eddie trying to. I think you split your pants. I know. And it's just like, I'm trying. And he couldn't. So I don't know how you finally did it, but if you ever go on YouTube or whatever, or Paramount Plus, you watch the episode, look for that scene. And it was playing where we're doing the pictures over here. It was playing. I went back and I showed him the scene of Eddie vaulting over the thing. It's like, yeah, it wasn't that easy. It was Eddie breaking his pants.
I love that you kept making him do it, and you weren't eventually like, you know what, maybe just walk around the counter.
The timing wouldn't have worked. It was like, it would have added 10 seconds to the show.
Eddie, do you have any memories of shooting in that theater? I love that theater. What theater is that? I don't even know. That's not a set.
It was
right?
actually called the Rialto.
Oh, cool.
And from what I understand, I think DJ did some research, and it's been completely refurbished now. And it was a beautiful, beautiful theater that deserved restoration. So yeah, I think it looks even better now than it did before. So.
Most of the shows were done like in real locations, right? I mean, you mentioned, it was funny, Jason, you mentioned the whole like Nosferatu scene with the the stone room and everything, and it's like, obviously that's a sound stage, but thinking beyond that, this episode mostly on location?
It was mostly in that theater, but the one thing we couldn't fit into the schedule at the theater was a scene that took place in the projection booth of the theater. And it's where the vampire comes in and confronts the girl and all that. So the week before we shot Midnight Madness, we shot The Final Wish, but we built that projection booth on a soundstage. And that's why Eddie was at the soundstage, and that's why Jason was able to meet him. But it was shot 4 or 5 days before we shot the rest of the episode. But the rest of it was on location.
All right, very cool. Now, were there any scenes that were written or shot for this episode that we never got to see hit the cutting room floor?
That never happened in the show.
Truly?
Budget was too tight.
Really? Wow. That's actually
Never.
pretty impressive.
Nope. If anything, things were cut for time. But the show was so precise.
Why do you think this episode in particular has become so iconic?
Any thoughts?
Let's all go down. Eddie, let's start with you. Just put the
Go.
pressure on.
I think for all the reasons we've just been discussing is that it's definitely a slice of life, and with Nickelodeon shows in particular, it's about having a genuine connection to the characters and also to the stories as well. And I felt like whenever I was watching shows like this, I felt like it was great to be treated like an adult, and it felt like it was something that resonated with me in a sense that it wasn't Disney. And yeah, I think that's what it is for me.
diversity and then not addressing it at all. But you know, when I met them, the thing that I liked the most is these two people genuinely liked each other and had a really great chemistry and energy, and it really comes across in that episode. So I feel like they're both really good actors, and then they have that. On top of it, they're also doing this very iconic Nosferatu story. The Pied Piper is the antecedent of it, and I just think it's really, really great storytelling. Actually, it's a bunch of things that will come together.
And one of the things that I always try to do with Are You Afraid of the Dark is not just make it about the boogeyman of the week. I always wanted to have a story about a couple of kid or a couple of kids who are going through some real, relatable conflict in their lives that isn't supernatural. In this case, it was Pete, character Pete, who was afraid this movie theater was going to go out of business, and he was doing everything he could to save this thing because he loved movies and he loved the concept of the old school movie theater as opposed to the multiplex. So, you know, that's something you can relate to. I mean, it's not earth-shattering conflict, and not all of them were, but it was something that you can relate to, and there's also the relationship between the two of them, where he really had a crush on the girl, and what was the line where she says,
I want a hug, or hug me, or
"Oh, hug me again." Oh, no.
Hug me again, yeah.
that is a good line. No, it was. No, Eddie did a great line. It was when they decide that the theater's going to be a success, and they're so excited, and they're like, "Oh my God!" and they hug each other, and they break apart. She's like, "Oh, what are we going to do?" And he's like, "I don't know. Let's hug again." It was so genuine. It was so cool. But earlier he said, "You're not a geek, Pete. You're a nerd." So I always want to put real kids into these then suddenly supernatural situations where a vampire comes out of the screen.
Do you remember seeing the vampire in the makeup for the first time? Because it's one of the most iconic characters, I think, from the series.
I do. Yeah. Growing up, I was also a real big fan of the vampire vibe and everything anyway, and so it just so happens that I was cast in a show that I absolutely love the subject matter as well. I mean, I've been watching like The Lost Boys, all of that was a part of my own personal interest. So seeing how that stuff comes to life was really, really special.
And DJ has a little secret about that actor, anyway, who portrayed the vampire that I honestly didn't know until you told me, so perhaps you can share it.
About being in the show? Or?
Yeah, like multiple other characters in the show.
We shot the show in Montreal, which is predominantly French-speaking. And so the English-speaking pool of actors, local actors, wasn't huge. And it's expensive. It's not an expensive show, so we had to import, like Jason brought him in from Vancouver to be in the show. So we had to reuse actors quite a bit, especially the adults. So Chris Heyerdahl, who played the vampire Nosferatu, he was in an earlier episode. If you ever saw The Tale of the 13th Floor, about the girl who turns out to be an alien. The 13th floor, there's a toy factory. He's the weird Leonid guy who's an elevator operator who's taking him up and down. He was also a vampire in True Blood. He was a vampire in something else. I think he was in the Twilight movies too, as a vampire. It's like this guy is like he was having his car. Chris Heyerdahl, vampire.
It's really cool. For the two actors, what's something you remember about DJ as a director?
We were
Be
talking
kind.
No, look, we were talking about this before. You know, there was that movie that came out, the documentary that talks about the horrors of for teen actors or child actors. And Eddie and I were talking about, look, this was my first television role, and I've done other things since, not as an actor, but as an executive and as a producer, and it was a great first experience because DJ's not just a talented guy, he's also just a genuinely terrific human being. And so what I'm trying to say is those things that you hear about in the documentary, none of them happened on our set. And it was like the most positive, healthy, there was no shenanigans, there was nothing like that. And I mean, look, you know, he had a big impact on my life. He cast me in my first thing. I have genuine affection for the man, which is why I'm here. You know,
It's not because of me.
well, it's also Jeff. You're also a
Thought it was
terrific
because of
moderator,
Jeff.
but a lot of it is DJ. And no, he's just a terrific boss. You know, really.
I have to agree with that. I mean, just working with DJ and also with Ned, changed the trajectory of my life in so many different ways. Ned wrote my my recommendation for college.
Oh, did he really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so these types of things, like having people that are supportive of you and your interests, particularly because filmmaking and all of the entertainment industry and in general, just I have such a passion for it, and it was something that what I remember the most about it is wanting to continue that interest and looking back on it now, how influential it was.
Well, it's tough. I mean, kid actors, you hear all these horror stories of kid actors, and most of them are true. But it's a tough position to be in. I mean, you're a kid, 12, 13, 14, whatever it is, and you're expected to be a kid. But when the lights go on and the camera's rolling, you're expected to be a professional, an adult, and that's a lot of pressure. It's a pressure for adults to be an actor. I don't know how actors do it.
It's also, you're a kid in an adult's world, you know, and there's always these stories about kid actors that do drugs and get mixed up in things, and I think it really comes down to the person, and anybody at that age that's not completely developed in their mind, and it's a lot of money, like you're given per diem, you're given a pretty good salary. Sometimes like you're kind of unsupervised, and if you don't have that kind of discipline, yeah, you can get up to some trouble. Like you absolutely can.
And then also finding your own value as a person as you're learning about who you are. That can also be a challenge, particularly when a lot of those things as you get older, you change, and you still have to grapple with identity and stuff like that. So definitely being in an environment where you're supported is really important.
I think also because it's a kid show or tween show. You think it's with a bunch of kids. It's an adult. It's the entire crew is adults. This is serious business. It's like you're spending a lot of money. The only children are the ones in front of the camera. So even as a kid, you're still in their world, and you're very aware of that. I think when you're 13 years old or 14.
It's pretty impressive. I was doing an event with DJ in 2022, and Eddie just showed up to this event, and so I saw that reunion happen, and I was like, oh my god, these people actually care about each other. Because when's the last time you had seen them?
On the set.
Shooting. That's wild.
Yeah.
Wow, that was just 2 years ago. And Jason, how about you? When's the last time you saw
I've been fortunate. I stalked DJ, so
Okay.
I stalked DJ over the years.
Cool.
I have seen him when I was at USC. I saw him. We had lunch, and then we had dinner not that long ago, 2 years ago or something like that. So, and anytime I get an excuse to see him or do a panel with him or do a Zoom thing with him, I always do it. So.
One of the things, and I hope it's evidenced by what these guys are saying, is that not everyone does this, but they should, is that when you're making a show, or it's not just show business, it's everything, if you put emphasis on the right things, and I've always tried to say it's all about the show, we're all professionals here, let's do what's best for the show, let's put egos aside, let's put any kind of personal things aside. And I've always tried to say, whatever decision I make, whoever it affects will realize why I'm doing it. It's like, this is why this is happening. And it's really important when you're working with kids, because they're so impressionable. So they would always understand that it's like, oh, this is, we're not playing here, this is real, but there's no other motivation going on here, but let's put on a great show.
Well, I'll give you a story of actually how pure of a set it actually was. So we're shooting in Montreal. It's a different kind of culture. And at lunchtime, the French Canadians like to drink wine. Now, DJ, and we didn't have that many, the Midnight Society is 6 kids, and the rest of it's the crew. DJ didn't think it was the greatest idea to have children sitting down to eat a meal with adults drinking wine. So we were literally taken out for lunch to different restaurants around Montreal. We did that for a couple seasons actually, just for that one reason.
Did you know that at the time?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
He told me, because I was like, why are we doing this? And he explained. I was like, okay, fine. And it was great because we just toured a bunch of great restaurants in Montreal. It was fun.
Well, there's more to it than that. Well, let's hear it. It was also, it's a very different culture. It's a very French culture up there. And when you start having wine at lunch, suddenly the afternoon slows down quite a bit. So I made an unpopular decision to say no wine at lunch. And they're like, well, sacre bleu, wine, where's my cigarettes? I'm like, sorry, no, we need to hit the ground running when lunch is up and we got to go. But again, that's the respect for the show. It's not because I had any prejudice against the wine. I drink wine too. But it's like, I can't have this happen in front of kids, and when you're not going to be at your best for 2 hours after lunch, when we are on a time thing. So it was both.
I remember a lot as a kid, Nickelodeon would kind of like, a lot of the different shows would kind of join together for special events like The Big Help or whatever, and a lot of those shows shot in Florida at Universal Studios, but of course Are You Afraid of the Dark didn't. Do you remember being invited to that sort of stuff? Okay, so you were taking part in that even though you were kind of...
I went to Denver for Nickelodeon had a thing, which was like, you write in and then Nickelodeon comes to your school.
Yeah.
So it was like, the lineup, and Crisscross was there.
Yeah.
And they performed at a elementary school in Columbine, that area. It was Littleton, Colorado. Columbine High School was like right next door. Beautiful suburb, by the way. We did that. We went to Florida Yeah, we definitely did stuff like that.
We went to Florida we did a CD-ROM game called The Tale of Orpheo's Curse.
Totally played that. Anybody else play that? Yeah, over there.
It was a good game. And for its time, it was a really good game.
It was like, it's the first time I remember seeing video on a computer screen, and it was super pixelated, but it was cool, and it was actually kind of scary. I remember being chased through the different rooms. Yeah, very fun. That's cool. Let's, we're gonna wind things down here, but let's just go down the line, Eddie, this way. Is there a favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episode for you? And let's just say we can't say Tale of the Midnight Madness.
What's the one that's based on you and Ned?
What?
Isn't there like one that was like, it reminds me of like, actually we saw this one, I think that was a part of the screening. A couple of, like the last time, forget the
I
name
had
of it,
one
but it's-
with Jay Barry Michelle, one of his episodes. And what was the other one?
It's two kids that are telling a story. No. It
Wasn't the Twisted Claw the Halloween?
You're not thinking of a Goosebumps episode,
No.
or anything.
Come back to me.
Okay, think about it. Jason, do you have a favorite?
Well, I have two actually. So one,
I said a favorite.
oh, I'm cheating, Jeff.
Okay,
But no, my brother was in an episode with Tatiana Ali called The Tale of the Quicksilver, so that one's always like.
Your
close to
brother
mine.
did an episode of Are You Afraid of the
Uh-huh.
Dark? That's awesome.
Yeah, it was him and Tatiana in that episode. So, and he shot that one, I think, right at the end of us shooting.
Mhm.
And then the one that I've always really loved is the Shiny Red Bicycle, because it's a really emotional story, and it's about this guy that's trying to come to grips with the death of his friend, and it's like it really got me. Like it's a very, I just think it's pretty terrific storytelling. For me, that's Are You Afraid of It's best.
One of the things that blows my mind is I'll be talking to DJ about episodes because I'm a nerd and I do that randomly. He gets weird texts from me sometimes, and you always know the tale, like the name. And I'm like, Eddie and Jason are like, the one where such and such happens, there are a select few. But you're always like, oh yeah, the tale of such and such. I was like, oh my gosh, you know all this.
He wrote it, most of them.
I
It's
lived
impressive.
in it.
It's impressive.
There's plenty I don't remember, quite honestly.
The ones he didn't direct, right?
Well, I remember those the most because I was on set. My favorite, I know this is against the rules, but my favorite episode is The Tale of the Midnight Madness. And the reason it's my favorite episode is not necessarily because I think it's the best episode, because there's no such thing as a best episode. So they're all different, so it's all subjective. But we did it at the beginning of the second season, and in the first season, we're all just trying to figure out what the heck we were doing. We're just trying to fly by the seat of our pants and try to figure out how to do it. And I remember giving scripts to the department heads, who mostly spoke French, but again, the department heads, and they look at the script going, what do you want to do here? What? He's in a mirror, all these wacky things. By the time we went through the learning curve of the first season, and we're into the second season, the difference was, I'd give them a script, and they'd say, okay, we got that, how can we make this better? So, in my opinion, The Tale of the Midnight Madness was the first time we were firing on all cylinders. It was the best. At that point, it's like, wow, this is what we can do. So I have a special place in my heart. Besides these guys, working with a great crew and all that kind of stuff, it's just like the end product was like, ooh, now we're hitting the ground running, now we got it. So that's why, personally, it's my thing. When you ask somebody what their favorite thing is, often it's because they have a personal attachment to it as opposed to objectively, but yeah, that's my favorite.
We'll get back to Eddie in a second, but since you brought it up, the personal connection thing, DJ does have a least favorite episode, and it kind of breaks folks' hearts when he says it. At least it did the last time you said it in front of an audience with me. What's your least favorite episode, DJ?
It's not that it's my least favorite episode. It's because it makes me twitch whenever I think about making that episode. Because
Do you know, Jason? Do you know? Okay.
It was the single most difficult episode that we did. It was so difficult. I was not going to direct it, but I was not going to foist it on any director to have to do it. I figured I better do it myself. And we bit off more than we could chew. I mean, the thing is, when you don't have a lot of money, you try to push the envelope a little bit and try to do a little better, but you don't want to go so far that it starts looking cheesy. This got a little Limburgery. Not the whole thing. And the funny thing for me is, like Jeff said, I was saying this, and people who know the episode, they're like, "That's my favorite episode. What are you crazy?" I'm like, "Well, thank God somebody likes it, because I see this gray hair. I had brown hair before shooting this episode."
Do we have any guesses before he says it? Any guesses of what episode?
What?
Well, you know it already. I'm not picking you. Anybody
no
not
fair.
know it? And okay, you can say it.
The Tale of the Pinball Wizard.
Such a good episode. Such a good episode. I'm telling you.
I mean,
My brother and I, who have very little in common, both love that episode. It's so good.
I'm not saying it's a bad
I'm
episode.
glad you went through that misery just for our joy.
The pain started from the very beginning. I didn't write it. I worked with a writer to write it, and they came up with this concept to say, imagine getting trapped in a giant pinball machine. And my first thought was, ooh, that's cool. Not realizing, have you ever seen a movie, a big budget movie, anything where someone was trapped in a giant pinball machine? No, because it's impossible to pull off believably. You can't. So from the beginning of trying to make the script work, and I kind of made it look more like a video game rather than a pinball machine. But and then we shot it in a mall where we had to shoot at night, and we'd show up for work when everyone's closing up their shops, and we'd shoot all the way through the night, and then we'd finish up while they're opening up their stores. So it was a weird topsy-turvy thing. And it was the only show, it took us 6 days to shoot. Normally it took 5 days to shoot the show. There was so many gags, so many bits, so many stupid, interesting things that we had to do, that we had to shoot a 6th day. Thank God it was the last episode of a season, because there's a whole union rule that if you shoot a 6th day, you have to pay everybody time and a half. And then if we had to then shoot again on the following or 2 days later, we'd have to pay time and a half all the way through. We didn't have any kind of money. So one, it was the end of the season, and we were out of money. So I love every person on this crew. They had to take a vote by the union rules. They had to take a vote that they would work for straight scale without having to have the time and a half, because that was the difference between meeting the budget for the show and not. And everyone voted saying, no, we'll work for scale. It's for straight. So I was just like, oh, thank God. And I felt beholden to everybody. Oh God, it was terrible.
That's actually really impressive, though, that the whole staff, I mean, that honestly speaks to you as a director and people, wanting
And there were probably a few that didn't want to, but then they got shamed into it.
I think I can actually speak to it. Like, DJ was beloved. Like, he was beloved by his crew. I've actually never seen anything like that before. They, and that's just a testament to the man, and the relationships that he had with everybody. And it's really rare. I mean, we joked about this before. It was like, that was my first experience in film and TV, and it's not been duplicated since.
Well, just know, everybody here that knows that episode is visualizing that giant pinball at the top of the escalator and salivating over it. So thank you for suffering.
There's more to my pain than what I
Oh,
said.
gosh.
Okay, I forgot until you said that. So if you saw the episode, has anyone seen the episode? You know what I'm talking about? And the whole thing at the end, it's got a negative ending where the kid beats the game, because there's always a climax, but then turns out he's stuck in the game forever. And the way that's illustrated is that this giant pinball appears at the top of this stairway. It's like, oh, so that's the way it ends. Then it goes back to the campfire. Season's over. Snick, you guys know Snick, Nickelodeon Snick. And so Nickelodeon put on this big party at Paramount Studios to congratulate everyone for making Snick. It was so great. So it was just a whole festival of, everyone's happy, and I was so happy we finished it. Oh my God, it's so great, we did it. And everyone's congratulating, and everyone's saying, good job, and I'm fine, it's fine. There's this one guy, the same guy I told you the story about earlier about the audition. Same guy. I'm just glowing because I'm just happy it's done and it's finished and all this kind of stuff. And he comes up to me at this party, a Nickelodeon guy, and he just looks at me with this smirk and he goes, a giant pinball, really? Exactly.
Before you're on Eddie, did you figure out your favorite episode?
Okay, so it's another vampire one, surprise. But isn't there a vampire in a hospital?
Yeah.
Oh
the night
yeah,
shift.
yeah. That was like the series, quote unquote, series finale, right? That was end of season 5. Your order was done, and then they ended up bringing you back.
Little did we know we're going to come back.
Yeah, and what did the door say at the end of that episode?
65.
65 episodes. The number was 65 on the door because that was it for the series supposedly. But luckily we got more, so it was great. One last question: did you ever play with the fire dust when you weren't supposed to?
Oh, we walked into our little our thing over there for the photos, and they've got the campfire set up, and they have the bag. And I then joked to DJ. I was like, the way that you made the fire, it was a pyro, but to make it flame up, it had coffee mate. So whenever you told the story, you put your hand in there and you throw. But then your hand smells of cheese for like the rest of the day. So nobody wanted to put their hand in that bag. So even just seeing the bag today, I was like, oh, So no, nobody was playing with the. Nobody's playing with the dust. It was 2 pyros. Like they'd light it, and they had these 2 little, what they call it a puff, right? And they'd have these pyros, and then you would throw it, and they would push in close, and that was that.
In case you use non-dairy creamer, just know it's a petroleum-based product, and it burns.
And it burns.
Wow.
So you can try it at home if you'd like, kids.
Well, folks, they are here the rest of the day. They're doing photos, autographs, all that fun stuff.
Yeah,
Come
come
right
see us.
behind us to the right here. Come hang out with them, and thank you so much for coming and reliving a little Are You Afraid of the Dark? And thanks to you guys for hanging out.